citizen of the kingdom of heaven is one thing that can help us to become good citizens of the world. It helps us to experience the brotherhood and to develop unselfish service. Reading the Urantia book and knowing what all those papers teach us also gives us responsibilities. And Richard Jernigan explains about these responsibilities in his speech. Jesus and politics, how do we reconcile living in the kingdom and living in the world? Richard Jernigan.
Oh, thank you, Karen. Lovely introduction. It's just a lovely conference. My gosh, what a turnout. This is my fourth here, and it just gets bigger and better each time. So, religion and politics, two things our mothers probably told us don't talk about at parties. We're going to talk about both of them. So, politics are an intense and unavoidable part of being human. Each day, politics intrudes into our news feeds and our daily lives. Political awareness and opinion is just as diverse among us Urantia book readers as it is throughout the rest of the world. Just look at Urantia book reader comments on social media to get a taste of that. This may look familiar to you. So as readers, how do the teachings of the Urantia book inform our politics? How should they inform our politics? Jesus was fully cognizant of his world's political and economic problems. In a conference one day on the Sea of Galilee with Peter, James, and John, he had a frank conversation about how his apostles should deal with politics, economics, and social issues. He recognized the need for social justice and industrial fairness, but he offered no rules for their attainment. The writers in this section say that Jesus was not a political reformer, and we should never make the mistake of associating Jesus with a particular political or economic theory with any social or industrial system. The writers in this section say Jesus was not, but that Jesus instead sought to make all men godlike and then stand by sympathetically while these sons of God solve their own political, social, and economic problems. Now, certainly, Jesus' great focus was to teach us without qualification God is our loving Father, and we're brothers and sisters, and regardless of who we are and what we believe, this universe is one vast family. Now, Jesus didn't offer rules or methods for social justice and industrial fairness because whatever he might have offered as a solution would only work for that time and those circumstances. This does not mean we ignore these issues. After all, the text says he frequently called attention to the injustice of unequal distribution of wealth. While the first goal of Jesus' teachings and the teachings of the Urantia book is our personal spiritual transformation, it follows that we need to be good citizens in our communities, our provinces, regions, landers, counties, and states, our nations, and our world. So social justice and industrial fairness, what does that look like in terms of Jesus' teachings? For starters, let's look at that statement Jesus made when he was a teacher at Urantia, at the School of Boyton, the Urantia Lectures. And he said that the Most High's rule in the kingdoms of men, and their goal is to foster the greatest good to the greatest number of all men, and yes, this includes women and children, and for the greatest length of time. The greatest good for the greatest number of all people and for the greatest length of time. A powerful statement for two reasons. It includes all people and for the greatest period of time. We just don't go divide up all the cash and make everybody happy for one day. This is about sustainable solutions, long-lasting solutions, systemic solutions that benefit humanity for great stretches of time. This involves political action and setting up governments that facilitate this work in an organized, systematic, predictable way so that we indeed help achieve the greatest good for the greatest number of all people and for the greatest period of time. Paper 71 clearly frames the features of progressive civilization and the ideal state. It makes targeted statements about ensuring both personal liberties and the common good, about building an effective society that facilitates human self-realization and augments cosmic insight. The paper makes clear statements about ideal government being of the people, controlled by the people, and benefiting the people. It clearly measures progress in terms of abolition of slavery, enactment of public education, gender equality, full employment, freedom of expression, promotion of science, care of the unfortunate, and many other attributes most of us enjoy to a greater or lesser degree in each of our native countries. This paper also mentions these characteristics: race improvement, and declares in Section 3, Paragraph 8 that no society has progressed very far when it permits idleness or tolerates poverty. But poverty and dependence can never be eliminated if the defective and degenerate stocks are freely supported and permitted to reproduce without restraint. All of us who have read the Urantia book are aware of the multiple statements the text makes about race and degeneracy. Most of us struggle with it, fully aware of the genocides, the involuntary sterilizations that occurred just as these writings were appearing and after. Many of us squirm, and we should. This is a sensitive area that can compromise personal liberty. We should tread carefully and thoughtfully around these statements. After all, there are some individuals who read this and feel vindicated in their various bigotries. That is a dangerous path. Let's face it, the Urantia book makes some statements that could open the door to callous and bigoted attitudes, particularly in the areas of race, of the poor and disenfranchised, and of the mentally challenged. I'm going to address these three items head on. Regarding the items the Urantia book makes about race, first of all, any bigotry toward or marginalization of any person on the basis of race is repugnant to the teachings of the Urantia book and certainly the teachings of Jesus. Amen. All races were represented among the disciples. Go read it, you'll see it. And there is no place in the kingdom for racial bigotry, as all of us are the children of God, with personality created by God and carrying a fragment of God. And let me extend this condemnation of bigotry to include religion, nationality, sexual preference, and other human conditions. Regarding any sense that the poor are somehow degenerate and unworthy of our care and compassion, Jesus continually showed sympathy and caring for the poor, knowing full well that much of the poverty of his world was a result of exploitation and less of laziness and lack of character. It is my opinion that we first ensure access to education, health care, and safe housing among the poor, particularly when the average pay of a CEO in the top 350 U.S. companies is 271 times that of the average worker. The average CEO earns in one day what his or her average worker is making in an entire year. I think we can do better than that. Regarding the sense that the mentally challenged are to be denigrated as some kind of threat to the evolution of civilization, let's first recall that two of the apostles, James and Judas Alphaeus, were likely what we would call today mentally challenged. Nowhere in the Urantia book is it ever considered okay to treat anyone with less dignity than we would offer to Jesus of Nazareth, were we to encounter him face to face in the flesh. God respects our free will. We must respect each other's. The reality disclosed by the Urantia book is one of justice, fairness, compassion, and mercy for all people, regardless of one's religion or lack of religion, wealth or poverty, intellectual strength or weakness. Each of us has a personality without duplicate in infinity, irreplaceable in all eternity. As faithful students of this text, this should have profound repercussions on our political, social, and economic attitudes. We should be active in pursuing justice, fairness, and equity in every realm of our lives. We have a duty, those of us who've been personally, spiritually transformed, to be good citizens of our world. So Thursday, before Jesus was arrested, he sat down with 50 of his followers and talked with him about how they should interact with civil government. I find it very interesting that of all the things he could have talked about that morning with his last conversation, he chose this. Now, certainly as apostles and disciples, their first loyalty was to the kingdom of God. But he told these men and women in modern phraseology, there is nothing incompatible between sonship in the spiritual kingdom and citizenship in the secular or civil government. It is the believer's duty to render to Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and to God the things which are God's. There cannot be any disagreement between these two requirements. One is material and the other spiritual, unless it should develop that a Caesar presumes to usurp the prerogatives of God and demand that spiritual homage and supreme worship be rendered to him. Fortunately, I don't think anyone in this room is dealing with the dictatorial Caesars of Jesus' time. But we aren't far from the time in which dictators ruled nations on this continent. The nations you and I live in today, more or less, are by the people and for the people. Hooray for that. With that working in our favor, we as Urantia book readers and followers of Jesus have ample opportunity to influence governments toward the greater good, and for that matter, toward light and life. Jesus went on to say that Thursday morning with these 50 men and women that it was his followers' duty to get close to the politicians and governors and be models of social service. Sonship in the kingdom, from the standpoint of advancing civilization, should assist you in becoming the ideal citizens of the kingdoms of this world, since brotherhood and service are the cornerstones of the gospel of the kingdom. The love call of the spiritual kingdom should prove to be an effective destroyer of the hate urge of the unbelieving and war-minded citizens of the earthly kingdoms. But these material-minded sons of darkness will never know of your spiritual light, of truth, unless you draw very near them with that unselfish social service, which is the natural outgrowth of the bearing of the fruits of the Spirit and the life experience of each of you. as we engage in politics, and many of us in this room do, including myself, I see three responsibilities as students of the Urantia book. First, we have a responsibility to engage in politics with intelligence, to be informed, to know how to distinguish between solid news and propaganda, to know what is real science and what is a conspiracy theory or an urban myth. We have a responsibility to do this with civility, regardless of our positions and the passion with which we hold our views. We express them with facts, with reason, and with respect for anyone holding an opposing view, because they are a beloved child of God. And third, we have a responsibility to do this with compassion. Jesus' compassion was boundless, his sympathy was practical, personal, and constructive. The Urantia book is out in the world freely and easily available. Each of us who have been changed by this book are ambassadors of this book. How we live our lives reflects back on the teachings. Each of our acts of divinity grows our souls. Each of our acts of truth, beauty, and goodness nudges toward light and life. Among with many millions of others, we represent Jesus in the world. No pressure. Thank you.